I was starstruck like I had just met a celebrity, and it was built in the 1700s. I walked into a room of telescopes and realized these aren't replicas, these are the actual instruments that built modern astronomy. And honestly, it made me realize how unbelievably good modern telescopes are. I'm here today at Chicago's Adler Planetarium to take a look at some of the really old telescopes they have in their collection. The Adler Planetarium was constructed in 1930 here on the shores of Lake Michigan in Chicago and was the first planetarium ever to be built in the United States. It's built in this gorgeous Art Deco style and is really a cornerstone of Chicago's museum campus. And I looked all over the Adler for eagles. The only one I could find was Aquila. That's a joke for you German speakers. As my family walked through the planetarium and its exhibits, I was most drawn to an area called Telescopes Through the Looking Glass. It was a who's who of telescopes, telling the story of how we got from there to here. And while other visitors strolled casually right on past the glass cases, I was fanboying. The museum was kept intentionally dim, almost certainly to preserve the instruments, but really it added to the atmosphere. By the time I wrap this video, I think you'll look at the gear that you already own completely differently. One of the first objects I came across at the planetarium was the oldest telescope on display outside of Europe, a Galilean-style refractor from 1630. This is what started it all, folks, and it was sitting right there in a glass case. I kept looking at it thinking about how simple it was, just a tube and some glass. It was awe-inspiring. Then you look around the corner and you get this. This was a refractor from 1865, and it's probably only 60 to 80 millimeters in aperture, but it was over 20 feet or 6 meters long. Essentially what they were trying to do was fix bad optics by making the telescope longer, because early lenses had terrible color fringing and were not corrected well. So the solution they had was to stretch it out, because telescopes perform better at longer focal lengths. They even had this telescope set up so that you could look through it at a simulated view of Saturn. And honestly, my old 60mm Meade from the 90s had it beat handily. It hit me harder than I was expecting, not because this scope was so bad, but because this was a cutting-edge solution to a problem at the time, and they had gone to great lengths to figure out how to get better views, but were totally limited by total usability. A 20-foot long telescope is absolutely ridiculous when you see it, and I can't imagine using that in any practical way. It really drove home that our entry-level telescopes would have looked like witchcraft to the people in this era. As you continued walking through the planetarium, there was an unassuming glass case, but this is where the real celebrities were, and I was blown away as people would just walk right on past as if it was nothing. The first part of the case had telescopes from John and Peter Dolland that were made in the mid to late 1700s. The Dollands are credited with developing the achromatic doublet for a refractor and eventually laid the groundwork for a triplet lens apochromatic refractor. And these were designs that dramatically reduced chromatic aberration without having ridiculously long focal lengths. Prior to this advancement, people were dealing with telescopes like that 20-foot monstrosity that we saw earlier in this video. I was also taken aback by the ornamentation that was on this Peter Dolland telescope, showing that these weren't just working instruments, but they were also beautifully crafted works of art. Works of art that you look through to see the works of art in the heavens. But as you move down into the case, right next to them were telescopes by Jesse Ramsden, and this is where I really started to get excited. Ramsden is most known for developing the Ramsden eyepiece. This is a two-lens element design that improved sharpness and eye relief dramatically. Parts of what you're using right now, today, trace directly back to this. They had one from 1775 that he had made set up, and it had an option for solar viewing, and there was another from 1780 that had actually flown on the space shuttle in 2009 in a servicing mission to Hubble. It was really neat to see that NASA had taken this delicate and fragile instrument and wanted to pay tribute to these early pioneers that set the groundwork for modern astronomy. You can even get Ramsden eyepieces in some new telescopes that you buy today. Granted, they aren't top of the line, but it just shows the staying power of this design. Next, we get to Josef von Fraunhofer, and you'll have to excuse me, I speak German and I have a hard time saying Fraunhofer. Fraunhofer was obsessed with optics, with making lenses better, more consistent, and more precise. And that's a big reason why his telescope is on display here at the Adler Planetarium, to recognize his major contributions, not only to optical quality, which ultimately also contributed to increases in telescope size, but also for his contributions to the field of spectroscopy. Every element in the universe, whether it be hydrogen or iron or calcium, absorbs light at very specific wavelengths, almost like a fingerprint. Fraunhofer developed a way to map those fingerprints in sunlight. What that means for us today is that astronomers can point an instrument at a star thousands of light years away and tell you exactly its chemical composition, just from the light coming off of that star. Fraunhofer himself died at 39. He never got to see how far that field would go, but today, astronomers still call those absorption lines by his name. That's what this one telescope, sitting in this one case, helped to make possible. This Newtonian telescope on your screen from around 1770 is tied to William and Caroline Herschel, a brother and sister who were musicians, instrument builders, and astronomers. Together, they built telescopes and found objects that no one had ever laid eyes on before. The telescope on display at the Adler is a twin to the telescope that was used to discover the planet Uranus. Another fascinating part of this exhibit was that this was one of the only Newtonian reflectors that was on display. When you go out to a modern star party, you'll see that reflectors and Schmidt-Cassegrains easily outnumber refractors on the field, but in this exhibit, refractors were, by and large, the majority of the telescopes here. This reflector looked very different from any telescope that we would see today with its octagonal optical tube assembly and this rigid fixed mount that it was on. I've saved what I think is the most remarkable story in this overall exhibit for the end. Wrapping up the exhibit was a monstrous refractor made by Alvin Clark Sons. This refractor was 18.6 inches or over 42 centimeters with its objective lens, and was the first of 5 record-breaking telescopes made by Alvin Clark. Eventually, this company would go on to make the 40-inch refractor that still sits at the Yerkes Observatory in Wisconsin, which was only a few hours away from where I was. But the Adler has on display, the lens from this telescope is still in use, but they have the optical tube and original mount on display. And this is where we're talking about now. We've moved on from trying to get quality out of optics and lenses and moving on to scale so that we can get more aperture and see a wider variety of objects that are fainter and further away. This telescope tube was enormous, and I can't even imagine what the 40-inch or about 102 centimeter refractor at Yerkes looks like up close. But here's the story that I love about this telescope. People had identified that the star Sirius, which is the brightest in the sky, was probably a double star based on its wobbling movement in the sky, but nobody had observed it. Alvin Clark's son, while testing the lens for this telescope, pointed it at Sirius, and for the first time saw Sirius B, which is the companion star in this 2-star system. It's a white dwarf and it's very, very small compared to Sirius A, which is also very bright. This is the point where people realized that adding aperture, making telescopes larger and larger, would dramatically expand what we could see in the night sky and would really help us begin to understand the nature of our universe. And that's what happens when the tools are leading edge and get good enough. They start revealing things even when you're not looking for them. And all of that eventually leads to what you have sitting on a tripod in your very own backyard. And here's the thing that struck me after walking out of that exhibit. Every telescope that you ever looked through, whether it's a little department store refractor or a 14-inch top-of-the-line Schmidt-Cassegrain, all of these telescopes exist because of people who looked at what they had, got frustrated, and figured out how to do it better. If this kind of story is what got you into astronomy, or reminds you why you stayed, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Which of these celebrities interested you the most? And if you like this and want me to keep exploring the history behind the gear that got us here, let me know that in the comments as well. This is Trevor from Night Sky Voyager. Thanks for joining me.